Hello, everyone. I wanted to unpack this particular comment because there's a couple of things going on there, and it is a very good lead-in to today's update on Ukraine and what's going on there. So, let me begin with the part where there's a lot I agree with in this comment. Yes, Putin should be allowed to destroy himself. Yes, nobody should want to save him, especially after his entire history of how he rose to power, his history of backstabbing, assassinations, invasions, etc. Now, the one thing I disagree with here is the statement that Ukraine is the proxy of the US in the war against Russia. That is not true. It happens to be so that Ukraine's opposition to Russia is favorable to the US politics. It happens to be so that Ukraine opposition to Russia is favorable to the EU policy and NATO policy. However, let me make this very, very clear. Ukraine would be fighting this war even if it was not something that went along with US, NATO, and EU policy. This is Ukraine's war for its very existence as a country, as a nation. So saying that Ukraine is a proxy, no, that is not true. It's true that Ukraine has been a buffer between Russia and the rest of the world for a very long time now, but it's not a proxy. It is its own independent entity, and one of the biggest disappointments in this war has been that it in fact has not been treated as the global conflict that it is. Because the hope among people of Ukraine was that people would join Ukraine in fighting Russia, like people joined together fighting Hitler eventually during World War II. And that is not exactly what happened. Now, moving on to our report for today. So for those who still insist that it's NATO's fault, it's NATO's expansion that prodded Russia to invade Ukraine, here's the timeline of NATO members by date as they joined. So let's look at this very carefully. There's some very interesting bits in there. So Soviet Union fell apart in 1991. 8 years later, members of the former socialist bloc joined in, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland. 2004, more members of the socialist bloc and former Soviet Union members. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In 2005, following that, we see Russia's invasion of Chechnya. At that point, Albania and Croatia said, fuck this shit, I'm joining too. Okay, so that's 2009. Then, in 2014, Russia annexes Crimea. Montenegro says, fuck this shit, and also joins, as does North Macedonia in 2020. Then nothing happens for a couple of years. In 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. 23, 24, Finland and Sweden join. Notice something interesting? So, the expansion of NATO that Russia is blaming for all of this took place following immediately the newfound freedom from the Soviet Union and following Russia's attempted invasions of other countries. Well, this is hardly a surprise that Trump misses his own deadline, his initial deadline of ending the war in Ukraine, his first day in office. No surprise there. By the way, I'd like to remind CNN and all of the other major news outlets, every time you hear shit like this, a broken campaign promise, some kind of new racist, sexist, xenophobic, homophobic statement, ethical concerns, I want you to remember every single time you tried to sane wash Trump over the last 4 years. You are partly responsible for this. Just saying. So it's true, while nobody really believed this was possible, nobody with working half a brain, the fact remains. He lied. This was never going to happen. And now it's on record. And the timeline keeps moving out. Also interesting, while Trump was spewing his hateful bullshit about all of the shit he was going to do to violate the rights of American citizens and immigrants living in this country, he didn't even mention Ukraine. He pounded on that topic all throughout his campaign, trying to show his strength and how much Putin is scared of him. And yet, if it was so important to him, he didn't say anything about it once as part of his inauguration. Meanwhile, we have some very interesting developments. So let's walk through. First of all, we've had another record loss day. We are up to 2,000 people per day. And as I mentioned before, honestly, NATO, EU, once again, stop hinging around the US policy. You've seen it. It's cray-cray around here. You cannot trust US anymore. I am telling you this because I am living here. I am an immigrant, I'm a woman, I'm LGBTQ, I'm neurodivergent, and I'm telling you, do not count on the US. Do your own thing. Now, this is something that Zelensky brought up, and this is actually a very valid point. So we've talked about this, what a peace deal would entail. And of course, one of the major concerns, as has been ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, is what if Russia invades? What if it just uses the ceasefire, the peace, whatever you want to call it, the armed troops, to accumulate more forces and just keep on marching? That was why the countries that left the socialist bloc and the countries that left the Soviet Union immediately started looking for NATO membership. That is why. That is what's been driving them all along, because go read the history of Russian Empire. So Zelensky makes a valid point here. In order to hold off that monster over there to the east, you are going to need to have a significant military presence in Ukraine from Europe, up to 200,000 troops. I agree with him. Because, remember, Ukrainian troops, some of them have been at the front for 3 years without a break. How do I know this? Because we have family members up there. And aside from, I think, a couple of times when they came home for like a week, they have been up there. So Ukrainian military is exhausted. We can't maintain peace through strength without someone else's help. Plus, we need people to rebuild all of the damage that Russia has done, all of the environmental disasters it had caused. We need to clean that shit up. We don't have enough people. So he's right in this. Here's something else happening in Russia, and that gave me a chuckle. If you can read Russian, and if you understand Russian really well, especially the idiom, and go on Telegram and read Russians' reactions to the war in Ukraine, this whole thing, the cocaine disaster, the cocaine crisis, explains kind of a lot. Despite Russia's best efforts, Russian government's best efforts to seize the illegal cocaine, it just keeps coming in. That's what happens when you start a war and all of your resources are pulled away from law enforcement, drug control, etc., and thrown in there. And then there is this, we do have some progress. Ukraine has hit another oil depot, hit them with it where it hurts. And we've had some explosions at a military aircraft plant. So I saw an amusing tweet yesterday, somebody from Voronezh saying, why are we having all these air raids? Really? Really? Where have you been living lately? Wake up and smell the gunpowder.